Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
To the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today we're joined by Stephanie Center, the host of the Revolutionary Health podcast, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and occupational therapist. In today's conversation, we're talking about the connection between gut health and autoimmunity and how mold toxicity can contribute to a variety of symptoms and show up in many different ways. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am excited for our conversation, and I couldn't wait to hit record because I knew some good things were going to come up, and I know listeners want to hear too. So let's jump in. I know you have, like so many of us, your own healing story that brought you into the functional medicine world. Share your journey with us.
Yeah. So I've heard you say this before on your podcast, and it's totally true. Like nobody wakes up going, oh, I think I'm going to be an expert in autoimmune conditions. Yeah. It's like, no, you get here because life was really hard for you at some point in time.
Yes.
And I do have a medical background. I worked as an occupational therapist mostly in hospitals, but I've been kind of everywhere over the span of a decade. Wow. That makes me feel old.
Oh, please. Girl.
Well, yeah. So what happened? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? I was working in traditional medicine. I was seeing patients. I even worked in the hospital through COVID a little bit, and that was interesting. But what happened? I got sick and the system didn't help me. And I remember I'm a very, I have a lot of gumption, I guess is a polite way to say that. I would sit down with the CEO of the hospital that I worked at, and I would sit down with him and have lunch with him regularly and say, look, Lou, like the system is broken. Let me tell you why you lost my business as a patient, because I don't think I'm a snowflake. I don't think I'm special. I'm having all of these symptoms. I remember very distinctly being 29 years old and looking down and being on all these medications when just a year prior, I had been on no medications, as 28-year-olds should be, and thinking like, my problem isn't solved. So what was my problem? I was exposed to black mold. I was in, and this is the scary part, I was living in a brand new apartment. I was the very first tenant in Nashville, Tennessee, and there was black mold. And mold is kind of interesting in that it kicks you where you're down. So I already had probably some digestive issues that I didn't know about, because when you're in your 20s, you're like, whatever, I'll sleep it off. And I just woke up one morning and was like, my world has changed. And I had all these symptoms. And my husband, who was also living in this mold place, had very different symptoms.
Yes.
So mold is not, it's not like, oh, here are the signs and symptoms of mold. It's like, no. It can be a bunch of different things.
Like literally anything. Really?
Literally anything. And so here I am. I don't know I have mold, and I'm going from doctor to doctor, and every doctor is siloed, which is its own problem because these doctors aren't talking to each other. And I'm like, oh my word, I'm on all these meds and I don't feel better. Like something's got to give. And I was on a lot of committees at my hospital. I was the cheerleader. I was, trying to make a change and make a difference in the hospital setting. And I just had this aha moment of like, Steph, this is bigger than you. This is bigger than you. And that's kind of when I went off on my own and started to learn about functional lab testing. And I was just like, I also remember distinctly thinking, okay, thyroid's involved. There's something wrong with my thyroid. I went to my primary care physician on 3 different occasions, begging for a thyroid panel.
Yep.
Be given TSH. If you're listening, you're like raising your hand. I've been there. I know that
Me
story.
too.
Yes. And so I finally said, do you have to be a doctor to order these things? Because like, you're just not getting what I'm asking you for. And I even at one point wrote on the lab, this is what I want to get measured. And I remember there was
Yes.
an older lady in the waiting room going, can I see your paper? Before I left the lab, which is just, anyways. So that's how I got into this business. I never dreamed of being an entrepreneur. I never had, you're in a position where you have a problem and nobody's solving it for you, and you have to solve it yourself. That's how I got here.
And then you get motivated to help other people do the same.
100%. And that's why we're all so passionate about what we do, right? Because we know that pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sorry for my long-winded answer.
No. There's so many. I have something in my eye for anybody watching the video. I'm not crying.
It was just so moving.
Yes. Well, and I actually could feel it because I've been there. And same thing. I showed up at my doctor after years and years of TSH testing and said, I want this. And I'd written down everything that's on a full functional panel. And she said, I'm so happy to do it, but I won't know what to do with the results. Like, that's the next level problem too, right? Because I'm one of many who I don't convert my T4 to T3. And so
Synthroid's not going to solve your problem.
No, I had already been on it for 3 years with no results.
Man.
So anyway, it's sadly common. And this is why we do what we do and have these conversations. Absolutely. So that everybody listening that was raising their hand, there are other places you can go for help.
100%. And people who know what they're talking about. Yeah, that's the other piece, is you have to understand what the lab means and how do it. I very much felt, and I don't know if you had this experience, but when I did have labs that were off, it was like, well, this is just how your life is going to be now, right? Like, this is just, we don't have a solution for you. We can just tell you you're not normal. It's like, well, that's not very helpful or empowering either.
Well, no, it's all disempowering. And I was thinking, when you said, nobody knew what was wrong with me and I was on all these medications. It wasn't a prescription deficiency. Like, we were, that's we need to get that in our head. Nobody is deficient in pharmaceuticals. And I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. There is definitely a time and a place. And sometimes we need both as a bridge. I'm curious, how did you figure out about the mold? Because I literally was just having this conversation this morning about somebody who has issues going on, and mold is a piece. But how did you, like you said, it was a brand new building, and I'm so glad you shared that, because we tend to think mold is only if you can see black mold on the walls, or if it smells musty, it's an old beach house, something like that. And people really need to understand that new construction can have mold as well. So how did you connect the dots between here's what was going on with my gut? Or was it just because you did full testing?
I'll preface this by saying it was not an overnight
revelation.
Shocker. I suffered for about a good year and a half with no answers, feeling really hopeless, feeling really out of sorts. I finally found a functional medicine doctor. She's an MD who's known for thinking outside the box. And she just looked at me and she goes, what if it's mold? And I'll be real honest. I laughed. I was like,
I live in a brand new
I don't have respiratory symptoms that you would associate with mold. But I said, you know what? That's one window we haven't opened in this house. So let's open it and see. And sure enough, I was positive for multiple types of mold, but Stachybotrys, the black mold, the king of all mold. The one was through the roof. And I'm really glad you mentioned not being against medicine. I'm not at all against medicine. I did antifungal medication, and that was very effective for me.
Which is great. And I love that you share that part of your story. Everybody thinks it's like, I take thyroid hormone, and I don't look at that as a failure. I joke, I would fight somebody in an alley if they tried to take my thyroid hormone away, because I feel so good when my thyroid is optimal. And I know, there is a camp of well, you should be able to fix everything. I don't care. My whole thing is about feeling well enough to live well, right? Enjoy life, not have that, which I know I can hear from your story, life gets smaller and smaller and smaller when we're sick. And so I have people come to me all the time. I heard your story. I want to do what you did. I want to get off meds. And I'm like, let's just figure out what's keeping you from feeling well. And then as a side effect, your doctors may take you off your medication, right? As you heal. Like it's not, it's the prescription after prescription after prescription for the prescriptions when you're still not. I joke, if my meds were working, we would not be having this conversation today. I would still be taking them and going about my business, because I wouldn't know better. So yeah, I love that you shared that, because people think, if it's not herbal, you can't do it. And sometimes you need, a heavy hitter. My daughter is home visiting, and she was just talking about, she had SIBO, and she was saying, I really felt the best when I was on Xifaxan, which is, for those who don't know, like a heavy hitting antibiotic that, we don't really want somebody on unless they have to be on it. But it was a clear indication. She tried other stuff first, so
I'm a huge fan of Xifaxan. Yeah. It's like, you know what? It's what makes sense for the person too. Like, right. I hate that we live in a world where everything is so like
black and white,
pro and anti. Yeah. Like, why can't we just do what makes sense?
Right. And I think I will say, like in the beginning of my functional medicine journey, like once I had healed and I went through the things I think most of us do, it's kind of like the, process of phases of grief. It's like the phases of healing, where then when you find out I got angry, like, oh my gosh,
Sure.
all these things were wrong, but I work with an amazing doc. And I think there is something to be said for, an MD or a DO who's practicing functional medicine, who can really marry those worlds. Is, it has shown me that, like, okay, the best of both worlds is really the best of both worlds.
100%.
Yeah, I love it. So you mentioned gut, and I hope people don't get tired of hearing, and I don't think so, because it's just such a vast topic of gut health and autoimmunity, right? And how does one affect the other? And so let's talk a little bit. You said, oh, I probably already had a weakness in my gut, and that's why the mold exacerbated, or either made it pop up to begin with, or but what is this, connection? People are like, oh, all you hear is gut health, but why is it so important?
Oh my goodness. How much time do we have?
I know. Big question.
For me, that's where mold presented for me. And I think that is kind of a unique story. Most people aren't going, oh yeah, mold and gut. And so that must have been, and then you start to get reflective, and you're like, yeah, I remember as a kid when my parents would take me to Olive Garden, I would have a tummy ache after that. My body didn't like Olive Garden. And you kind of go, oh yeah, I probably wasn't like stellar health like I thought.
Well, we normalize. How do you even know? You don't know. You're only in your body.
And you don't, and this is true for a lot of women that I serve, that they don't realize how bad they feel until they start feeling good.
Oh my gosh.
And so for me, I woke up, vulnerable moment. I woke up one morning and I went 17 days without a bowel movement, which is I was never constipated in my life. So when this mold hit, it hit me hard.
Wow.
I ended up in the emergency room.
Sure.
Ironically, at the hospital that I worked at,
which is great.
Which I thought, well, this was a red flag for me. This was a wake up moment for me. Like, I had terrible, terrible care. And this is not I love the people I work with. They're wonderful.
It's the system.
Listen, I packed my bags. I told my husband, I have a small bowel obstruction. I'm going to the emergency room today. They're going to do surgery. Here's what's going to happen. So I get there, they do a scan. I do not have a small bowel obstruction. They just said, you're really constipated. here, we're going to write you a prescription for an enema, and then you're going to go to Publix across the street, the local grocery store, and you're going to fill this prescription and go home. And I was like, wow, $1,000 later, I could have just gone and gotten an over-the-counter enema. And like, also, don't you think I tried this already before coming to you? So it was just like, and then they're like, and we'll set you up with a gastroenterologist who can meet with you in November. And it was July at the time.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I was just like, what? Like, and I'm just supposed to suffer between now and then. And the funny thing about mold, if you don't treat the root cause of mold, which is mold exposure, your problem is not going to go away because mold colonizes and grows in your body. And so I was on all these different meds to like make me go. And really what happened is that it almost caused like bowel incontinence. I remember I was hiking one day and I was like, I think it's coming out of me, because my problem wasn't constipation. My problem was this fungal overgrowth in my gut that I didn't need Linzess, right? I didn't need that medication. That didn't solve my problem. And I was just like, what in the world? So I did, the colonoscopies, I did the endoscopies. Well, you're not celiac. Yeah, you're okay. No colon cancer. Great. Thank you. I'm so grateful for that. But why do I have this problem, this horrible problem that won't go away? And I will say too, like, healing is a journey. Even after figuring out the mold, it wasn't like I felt good right away. No. It took me years to heal. So if you're listening, like, be in it for the long haul. Like, celebrate your quick wins, but know that you're gonna have good days and bad days. It's like the stock market. It's going to go up over time, but listen, there are going to be some real dips in the middle. And that's kind of my story there.
That is the first. I've never heard healing is like the stock market. You definitely want to be a long-term investor for sure.
Yes.
I love that. And it's so true. And I just had this conversation yesterday. I feel so well, but I feel so well because I do the things. Right. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm not doing the things to the way I should be, guess what? I mean, thank God I will never, because I have the power, go back to where I was when I was really sick. Mm-hmm. But, I know, like, if I don't get enough sleep 2 nights in a row, well, you better believe that third night I am getting my sleep, because I just can't. And we get hit with different stuff and we need to adjust and grow. And it's a process that's never done, for sure.
Absolutely. And I would say also, if you're somebody on a healing journey, for me, I took it too far. Like, I was down to like 11 foods that I trusted. And for a year and a half, I only ate food that I made. I wasn't eating out. And that's not a great quality of life either. So finding that balance of like, of course, I'm never going to eat McDonald's again, but also if I'm going to a wedding, I should be able to participate in that meal at the wedding. Right. So finding that, like,
to a degree,
that middle ground.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's part of the process when we've been so sick and then we find, what helps us get well. I went through the same thing. And that's one of the reasons I always joke with clients when we're getting ready to do an elimination diet. I'm like, I know you think this sounds crazy, but you are not going to want to reintroduce, and we are going to do it while we're together. Because you need the most varied diet that supports you. So I think that's very common of, we just hold on to. I have a client who has RA and ulcerative colitis, and I was talking to her yesterday. She's been doing amazing, like really quick. It's just crazy, so quickly. And that was one of the questions I asked. I said, well, have you been eating out? And she said, yeah. I was like, yes, you're not just hiding in your house, eating these few things, because that's the point. Big life. We want big life.
Oh, I like that. Big life.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So you talked about, and I don't know, for me, I was like, well, yeah, it makes sense. I know we mentioned mold can show up anywhere, right? People ask me all the time, well, what are the symptoms? I'm like, what symptoms do you have? It could be, at least a factor. And you're right. We initially think of respiratory stuff, that would be something that would lead people to check for mold quicker. But I think of toxins and gut health as definitely going together or counter to each other, and mold is a toxin. And so that does make sense to me. Let's talk a little bit about it can be mold specific or toxins in general and how that impacts gut.
Oh, absolutely. Because your immune system lives in your gut, right? So, and like just basic biology, right? You have one hole from your mouth to your butt, and that you just have one tube. And the air you breathe is going into that tube. Anything you drink, anything you eat. I interviewed Michael Rubino once. He's like a mold expert. He wrote the Mold Medic book, and he said something that blew my mind. He goes, we take 20,000 breaths a day. That's 20,000 opportunities for things to enter our respiratory tract, but also our digestive tract.
Yeah. And don't stop breathing, people.
Don't hold your breath. But yeah, I mean, there are other toxins outside of mold that exist and that live, and I think that's part of this conversation of the microbiome. Everybody's interested in the microbiome. Like, where did this come from? What is this? And then we could, I mean, if we really wanted to go down that rabbit hole of glyphosate and how that strips, the biodiversity of our soil. So we're not getting biodiversity in our food like we used to. And that offsets our gut. We're not as well equipped for those toxins that we come in contact to, because we already are at a disadvantage biodiversity wise in our gut. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It definitely, and again, it's like you said, it's not necessarily mold specific. It's all the toxins. You can't separate out glyphosate from, I'm one, not everybody feels the same way. I feel if you had I think health is individualized, and there's no one plan for everybody, but to me, the one constant is if you have autoimmunity, gluten is not your friend. And then I do follow it up with, I can't tell you if it's the actual gluten or the glyphosate, because you can't separate them out if you live in this country. You just can't. And it doesn't matter. Really. I mean, one day we'll know which one's worse, right? I think it's probably the glyphosate for sure. But when we talk, and that's where it's the how much time do you have conversation, because when we talk about, well, why are autoimmune numbers exploding? And is it our food system or is it the toxins? Well, our food system is toxic. So how do you separate those factors? I think you just can't.
No, there's
not to be doom and gloom, really.
Not at all, because we have agency over all of these things, right? You can choose what you eat. We could grow our own gardens if we wanted to. We don't have to.
I do. And I cannot wait until, we're going to plant in probably about 3 weeks. And it, I live somewhere where I don't grow in the winter other than my parsnips. And I still have some in the garden from last year, which is amazing to me that they can just still be so happy and tasty. I am tempted. My best friend lives in Florida in a condo, and she has this like hydroponic indoor garden. And I'm like, we may need to do that. So we have stuff all winter long. Because in the summer, and I have, clean protein in the freezer. In the summer, I barely go to the store at all because we just go outside and get dinner.
That's awesome.
It's great. But and that's not a reality for everybody. And people say, well, I don't know how to garden. I don't know how to garden. I just plant stuff and it seems to grow in spite of me, I am like the least educated gardener, and we just added 2 more garden beds because we just love the abundance of the food all summer. But again, so aside from that's really, taking ownership and an opportunity, I do believe you can, like my friend grows inside, you can garden anywhere, but that's not a starting point usually for most people. So what are your what should people be doing, and maybe specifically people with autoimmunity? if they're listening, let's go back to the mold before we get into the food.
Yeah.
If somebody's listening and they're like, well, I have symptoms that just don't add up, right? Or they don't really know, what should they do? How do they explore?
So there are a couple things you can do if you want to get data on your house. Like if you are thinking, oh, I think my house might have mold. There's a test called an ERMI. It's Environmental Mold Relativity Index. Pretty cheap test to do. You get a wipe, or you can get multiple wipes depending on how many spaces you want to test. There are pros and cons to the test, just like any test. But I think overall, it gives you the richest amount of data, the best bang for your buck if you wanted to test the space you're living in. Now, if you're wanting to test yourself, like is my body full of mold?
Right.
There are a few ways you can do that. You can, Great Plains has a great mycotox profile. I also like just your regular IgE blood mold test to see, like, do you have a
really
short-term reaction to mold or a long-term reaction to mold, and the different types. And that can give us, I always think of, like, because with mold, you can't look at somebody's report and be like, oh yes, you since 1979, you've been doing, you can't do that. It's not akin to, like, I compare it to a stroke on an MRI. You can look at someone's MRI and you can tell, oh, this stroke was acute or this stroke was remote. You can't really do that with mold, except when you use these blood tests where you can say, oh, you're having an acute response to this, or you're having a long-term response. And then we can go, oh, well, maybe your childhood home had this and maybe you don't have it, or something. It gives us more nuanced information. But I will also say, like, if you're going to test yourself, it makes sense to test your house. Because if you're positive for it and you don't know about your house, you're not really doing yourself a service, because you're going to have constant exposure to it if you're living in a house with it. That would be.
Can you heal from mold toxicity while you're currently being exposed?
Yeah, that would be very hard. I don't know. I mean, you can certainly try. It'd be just a game of merry-go-round,
Yeah, I'm going to go with no. You can't. It was a leading question. I can't swear nobody ever could. But yeah, that's an uphill battle.
It would be like trying to paddle a boat that has a hole in it. Like you're not going to get very far because you have an entry for water, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so say somebody has mold, they get tested, they have mold toxicity, they, figure out it's this house, it was an old house. I lived in South Florida for 13 years, well before I got ill, but I have no doubt that was where I was exposed.
Huge place for mold.
Oh yeah. It's everywhere now.
It is
literally everywhere. When we moved here 20 years ago, we were told, oh, there's no mold in Colorado. Bull. Like, yes, there is. And there's mold in Arizona. So it really doesn't matter where you live. Some places for sure are worse. But if somebody says, they do the testing, they find out, okay, I have mold toxicity, we're going to go after that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it ever in isolation, or, do you have people do other things?
Oh, that's a great question. Right, because what's a good example of this? Most people that have a thyroid problem don't have a thyroid problem because they have a thyroid problem, right? Most people with a thyroid problem have a thyroid problem because they have a problem somewhere else. So that's kind of where the conversation goes with mold, is like, well, where is it presenting in your body? What problems is it causing you? And it kind of is like a choose your own adventure sort of deal, where you're going, hey, where do we look next? Like, what do we think is happening? And you're just kind of peeling the layers of the onion for somebody, which is super empowering, by the way, when you finally have answers and validation. If you're listening, 100%, this is not in your head. Like, you are not crazy.
Thank you. Yes.
Your symptoms are valid and real. And your experience is going to be different from somebody else's. And that's why I'm really against our cookie cutter healthcare system that kind of treats everybody like they're in an assembly line.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so important to treat somebody as an individual, as a person. Yeah, we're going to use lab data to validate your health concerns, but we're not treating the lab data. We're treating the human, and that's going to look different for everybody.
And we're not treating the symptoms. Like you said, it's the why, like why? Why thyroid?
Yeah, your symptoms are important. They matter. I want you to tell me your symptoms.
Oh, absolutely. But it's
yeah,
not going to be, here's a pill for your symptom. It's going to be, then we're going to ask, why is that expressing that way? Yeah.
Yes. Amen.
Yeah.
Because you're not having a migraine because you're having a migraine. You're having a migraine because something else is happening in your body. So yeah, we don't want you to suffer with migraines, but we also need to figure out why you're having them in the first place. I don't even remember what your question was originally.
So it was to say somebody like you mentioned, and we'll just take it back to your story.
Okay.
You know, mold it's opportunistic, right? So it's going to show up in your body where you probably already have something going on, even if you weren't aware. Mm-hmm. So for you, it was gut, and we're talking gut health and autoimmunity. And so I'm guessing you didn't just go after the mold, and then that was it. You took the medication, you took the antifungal, and then you were all better? Oh,
heck no. That was just the starting line. If this was a marathon, that was like mile 3.
Okay.
Because then you learn about more healing opportunities in your body. Because you have to ask yourself, if somebody else were to live in this apartment, would they be feeling the same thing as me? Or
you said your husband wasn't, right? So
wasn't. Yeah. He did react to the mold, but he was nowhere near as sick as me.
Yeah.
And so that made me consider, well, do I need to do genetic testing? Do I need to do, it just kind of opens your mind up to all these things that you could be doing. Because ultimately we want to feel well. We want a great quality of life. So no, I didn't just stop at mold. I worked really, really, really hard to heal my gut. Okay. Because I had identified that as a weak spot. And so, I did a lot of things. Some things worked and some things didn't. And you just kind of, trial and error things. And I would say that as an encouragement, if you're listening and you're like, well, I tried to heal my gut and it didn't work. Well, then you didn't try the right thing. Try something new. And work with a practitioner that's not so cavalier that they think that,
this is the way. Yeah. Yeah. And work with a practitioner. I mean, I healed a majority of my symptoms, at least, with that before I found a practitioner. But I always joke, I don't recommend, it was like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Right. Mm-hmm. I would listen to a podcast and try, or read a book and try. And because I didn't know there was this thing called functional medicine, and that there were health coaches and practitioners that could help guide, which is why you and I do what we do, because we can shortcut for people. We can really help guide them. Yes. But I love what you said. There is no all-knowing practitioner or coach or anybody who has the one way to heal. That's just not. So you want to make sure you have somebody who, has a lot of tools, or will refer you if they're stuck.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or partner with people, I mean, that's
you do that just all the time.
What about, this is an opinion question, but it's an educated opinion question. Because this is trickier, I find in practice to convince people. Somebody comes to you and they have autoimmunity and maybe mold and a list of things, but they don't have gut symptoms, right? Because I think it was easy for you to know you needed to work on gut healing, right? Mm-hmm. But what about people who don't have gut symptoms? Do you think they still have gut healing work to do if they have other expressions of autoimmune conditions?
Ooh, that's a great question. I've never been asked that before. It's funny you mentioned that. I'm actually working with a client right now who jokes and says she has an iron gut. And we have decided to run a GI map on her because she has other symptoms that even though they're not digestive, they still kind of nod to the gut. But maybe this is gut related and we just don't know it yet. Because the gut plays so many roles in your body. It's not just rest and digest.
I'm going to just keep throwing you under the bus because I know you can handle it. What are some of those other things that nod to that's probably involved somehow?
Yeah, so we were talking about cravings. Cravings can maybe indicate some nutritional deficiencies or malabsorption or something. Feelings and this
Or overgrowth.
or overgrowth. Yeah. And I'm gonna like say this as a blanket statement, like feelings of maybe anxiety.
Yes, I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, and I say like there are lots of things that cause anxiety, and I'm not trying to say that it's all related to the gut, but it can be, because anxiety can be your body's way of saying, hello, something's wrong, pay attention to me.
Yeah, and your neurotransmitters most of them are made in the gut. So
yes,
it's we think of somebody has anxiety and that stress causes gut problems, but it's like chicken or egg, and yeah. So I was hoping I was secretly hoping you were going to say anxiety as well.
All right, I'm glad I hit that ball when you pitched.
I knew you would, but no, all of them. I mean, so really, there's. I don't think, and this has been an evolution for me, because when we started learning more and more about the microbiome and the gut, and I was one of those people who rolled my eyes, like, oh, everything's the gut, everything's the. Now I'm like, oh, holy moly! It really all. Like you said, it may not be the cause, but at some point it's involved. And I believe unless you've already done that intensive work to heal the gut, like you said you've done, if you have autoimmunity, you need to heal. Like I've yet to find anybody who doesn't have leaky gut that already has autoimmune expression.
Yeah.
It's, I think, one of the drivers, right? Or if you have a high toxic burden, whether it's mold or environmental or metals or all three, which usually, it's a combo, chances are pretty good that has affected the integrity of the gut in some way. And so I really do think that it's just got to be part of a healing protocol but I find it, the reason I was asking really was personal. I find it harder. It's easy to work with people on gut healing when they have severe gut symptoms, right? But when they think they have an iron gut or they feel fine in that sense, it's harder to get them to make some possibly uncomfortable temporary changes, at least with diet, as we're working on healing. And so I was just curious as to what you see.
Yeah, I've definitely come across that. Or something, you'll run a hormone panel, and you're probably familiar with the Dutch. The Dutch, they give you indican, which can
not
be
the Dutch people, by the way. This is the Dutch test.
Sorry, dried urine test of comprehensive hormones. Yes, good catch. So you get in this world and you're like, everybody knows everybody.
Knows what a Dutch is. And some people are like, I'm Dutch.
So that test has a marker that can kind of, or multiple markers, in my opinion, that can kind of point to maybe there's something going on in your gut that we need to pay attention to. And that's kind of the beauty of comprehensive functional labs, is they give you ideas on what's happening in a certain place in your body and maybe where to look next.
Yes.
So that you never have a feeling of hopelessness, because you're always going, well, there's something else we can uncover here. There's something else we can do. And so if this isn't your like magic bullet that fixes your problem, guess what? We have another place where we can look for answers, because this test points to that. And I think it's really empowering to kind of give that to somebody and not only validate, like I get a lot of tears from clients, like, oh my gosh, it's so good to know that like I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
And and I'll tell you, there's nothing on any of these functional labs that any of us are intimidated by. Like, you have agency over everything on those labs. So you use those labs as validation and then empowerment to heal.
Yeah. And functional testing can be expensive, and there are so many rocks to look under that it is great to have the guidance to do like a comprehensive something comprehensive. I know you use Dutch, I used a different, comprehensive blood tests, but it really gives us the, like, okay, this is the first rock to look under, or these are the first rocks to look under. Because I'm somebody, because I lived it for so long, that I want to look under all the rocks, like immediately, right? Like, I just want to know. And that's not realistic for most people, and not necessary either. And so I love that you said, it's great, it's validating, and it also can guide both.
Yes. And I want to clarify, I do not tell clients, let's do 12 different labs.
No, but I'm saying, like, I would if I could, because
yes,
I love data.
We start with one, and then months down the road, I'll do another one, because that first test is going to give us a lot of things we can work on. Sure. But yeah, I also think, but like yourself, I got curious and I was like, I need to do all the tests to see all the things. But I'm a practitioner, so that I should be interested in doing that.
Exactly. Like, this is I'm like, oh wow, they can test that. I want to try. I want to see what's going on in there. And that's where, like, we were talking about glyphosate earlier. I knew I had mold toxicity, and I knew I had heavy metal toxicity. And then all of a sudden, when I started using for my clients a complete toxin panel that also included environmental toxins, and this is after years and years of me living clean and doing the things and healing and detoxing. I was like, well, I want to do it. I haven't done that. I'm going to run a full panel on me. I was like, holy moly, how, like, I still have glyphosate through the roof. Like, somehow I've been able to clear metals and molds, but that I've held on to. BPA, I haven't used plastics in forever. It's wild. And I love, and no, it's not really changing anything about how I live, other than reminding me that maybe I need to be up leveling some of my protocols for myself, because I'm human too. Of course. But so you don't need to do all that testing. Just when, like you said, when you're living in this world, it's like, I'm curious. I want to know. Yeah. I love, and we can find out now, which is exciting.
Yeah, I love playing detective. I love, and I'll be my first guinea pig, right? Like, I want to know. Whenever I hear about a new test, I always run it on myself first, because I'm like, oh, me too. Is this helpful? Let's see.
I did a new to me DNA test last year, and I was like, this is cool. Like, we did it to see would it be useful for clients and patients? Like, is it something? And for me, it was like, oh, look, I have a genetic predisposition to procrastinate. This is so validating.
That's awesome.
My daughter was complaining about that. I am very deadline motivated. Like, my daughter was complaining about, and I'm like, sorry, it's genetic. And I'm not saying our genes are our destiny, people. It's just fun to explore some of these things and be like, oh, So we covered a lot, and you can pick from something you've already talked about or totally out of the blue. But what is one thing that listeners can do today? Like, if they were nodding along with any of this conversation, what's something they can do to start to move their needle on their health?
Yeah, I love this question. And I always have like 18 different answers picked out. And then I know. I don't know what I want to say more. Come out. Okay, so we've been talking about mold. So I'm just going to say two things, if that's okay. Two free things you can do. Okay, one thing, open your windows, get ventilation. Okay, your outdoor air is, I would argue, almost always cleaner than your indoor air. So get ventilation in your house, open your windows for 30 minutes a day. That's easy, it's free. It should feel good to have like outdoor air. Yeah, fresh air. Even in the wintertime, even if you live in northern Michigan, yes, do it for 30 minutes a day. It won't kill you. And the other thing is, take your shoes off when you get in your house. That's another free thing you can do. You know what you're tracking in. You don't want me to tell you what's living on the bottom of your shoes. And especially if you have carpet, 100%, please take your shoes off when you get into your home.
For babies and toddlers and people that are going to be,
oh my gosh,
crawling around on the floor.
I have a 6-month-old who is rolling.
That's why I said it.
Yeah, multiple times. Like I turned around just earlier today and she had rolled like 3 consecutive times. She was like on the other side of the room. And I was like, oh no, this is starting
This
already.
is the beginning.
Yes.
Yes.
I need to get one of those baby jails, one of those like pack
Uh-huh.
and plays to put her in now.
Yeah, for a little while until she can break out.
Yeah,
So
until
fun.
she can, yeah. Oh gosh.
Sorry, that'll be a while. You'll have respite in between. So, but that's awesome. So open those windows. I love saying that. I'm so glad you said that. We were talking about new construction, you know, also potentially having mold. And this is one of the reasons why it can be such a problem, is because now for code and to pass inspection, homes have to be too airtight. I think too airtight. Like they have to pay. I watched them. I built the home that we live in now, and I watched them do that test where they make sure, you know, when everything's closed up. And that's the best solution is, okay, open those windows. You know, we all think like, oh no, but I have, you know, like I have air filters but we don't tend to really remember that the air outside is so much cleaner than the air inside the house. For sure. So I love that tip. I'm really glad you gave that one. And the shoes thing. It's funny, the things that when I was young, I used to think were kind of like neurotic. They're just smart. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it's just based in good science. So really great tips. I'm glad you gave both. You got the bonus. It's so hard to give just one.
I know. You have more agency over your health than you realize. You really do.
I love that. And that's exactly why we have these conversations. That's the whole point, because chronic illness can be so disempowering. And that's why Steph and I are here, is to help you take your power back.
Yeah.
So for those that listen like I do, which is usually on the go, where's the best place for listeners to find you?
Yeah, so I have a little podcast. It's called Revolutionary Health with Stephanie Center. It's on any and all of your favorite podcast platforms.
Same as these. Yep.
So you can just type in my name, Stephanie Center, and I guarantee you it'll come up. I have similar conversations as Julie. I like to interview people. I kind of challenge, because I came from a traditional medicine world for so long. I kind of interview people in traditional and functional and kind of challenge ideologies and beliefs on both sides and kind of see, you know, well, what's your approach? Why is this your approach? And just kind of all good-hearted. And I'm not, the intent is just to learn, for you to learn and make your own decisions about things. And I'm also, you can find me on Instagram at Holistic Stephanie Marie. I try to post content there regularly, and I have different.
So much better at it than I am. Check out her Instagram is awesome.
I'm going to age myself. I was out of graduate school when Instagram came out, so I feel a little bit like I don't know what I'm doing, but I figured out the highlights thing. And I have highlights where I'll go to Costco or Trader Joe's, or, you know, name your favorite grocery store, and I'll take pictures of organic processed foods. And I'll ask you, is this healthy or not? And you'll be surprised even though it's labeled USDA organic, what is healthy?
Well, but you said processed.
Yes. Processed foods. The produce I don't need to take a picture of, because you just know.
Right.
But it's interesting what they sneak into processed food. So if you're interested in like how to navigate, like if you're going to buy something processed, like we all do, we all buy something that's processed, how to support those companies that are doing it right. Better. Yeah. So I would 100% pay an extra 45 cents for the non-Whole Foods brand if they're not putting canola oil in there. Something. Yeah. I wish they would just take that out of the store, although they'd have to clear the store. So they would have to, do
you know, if you go to the store in Austin, if you go to their flagship store, they don't use canola oil because Austin won't stand for it. And
I've been to their flagship store.
Yeah, they don't use canola oil.
I want to say their hot bar still had it.
Then it was one of the other stores in Austin. I've been to one in Austin and it's because the locals.
Good for them.
No, we won't buy this. And then of course you could look for it in another store, and it was one store, you could get like grilled veggies with olive oil. I would, yeah. So
I would 100% give them my business at the hot bar if they would swap out the canola oil.
oh, me too. Me too.
But they won't, so I don't give them
that would be my go-to when I travel would be,
yes. And that was our thought, like, because we were going to like DC, we had all these trips and we're like, well, we'll just go to the Whole Foods hot bar.
Yeah.
And then we got there and we're like,
and it's like, wah, wah.
Yeah. I was really disappointed in that. Because
we could travel together, Steph. I'm with you. Find that clean food.
Yes. So anyways, those are the places you can find me. I love interacting with people. So yeah, come say hello.
Stephanie, thank you so much. You have shared amazing gold with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been following your work for quite some time, and it's great to finally connect with you this way.
And likewise, I know you were busy having a baby for a while, and so I'm glad we finally got to sit down and do it.
Yeah, thank you.
For everyone listening, remember, you can get the show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.